The cold was a constant companion. It was a thief that stole the feeling from her fingers and a beast that gnawed at her bones. Alara knew its many forms. There was the sharp, biting cold of the wind that sliced through the threadbare wool of her tunic, and the deep, damp cold that seeped up from the stone flags of the great hall floor. Today, it was both. Her knees ached, pressed into the unforgiving stone. Her hands were raw, chapped, and bleeding in small, insignificant ways from the harsh lye soap and the endless scrubbing. She was tasked with cleaning the soot from the flagstones in front of the hearth, a job given to her because no one else wanted it. A job for the worthless. That was her name here. Worthless. Omega. Ghost. She had been left on the pack's doorstep as an infant, a nameless burden with no scent of belonging, no hint of a powerful bloodline. The alpha of the Silverwood pack had allowed her to stay out of a grudging sense of duty, a charity that had long since curdled into resentment among his people. She was a shadow in the corners of their lives, useful only for the tasks others deemed beneath them. She fetched water, mucked stalls, scrubbed floors, and endured the casual cruelty that was as much a part of her day as breathing. A finely crafted leather boot kicked lightly at the bucket beside her, sloshing foul, sooty water over her already soaked tunic. The shock of the cold was a familiar misery. "Still scrubbing, little ghost?" Lyra's voice was like honey laced with poison. She was the Alpha's daughter, beautiful and cruel, her silver blonde hair a stark contrast to Alara's own dull, mouse-brown locks. Alara did not look up. Looking up was an invitation for more. She kept her eyes fixed on the gray slurry of soap and soot on the floor. "Yes, Lyra." Lyra laughed, a tinkling sound that made the hairs on Alara's arms stand up. "Father says a storm is coming, a real monster of a storm, the kind that freezes the marrow in your bones." She paused, letting the threat hang in the air. "Make sure the firewood bins are full to the brim, all of them. I should hate to be cold tonight." The firewood bins were already full. Alara had filled them herself just after dawn, her arms screaming with the effort. This was just a game, a way to push her, to remind her of her place. "Yes, Lyra," she repeated, her voice a hollow whisper. "Look at me when I speak to you, Omega." The command was sharp, edged with the authority she was born to. Slowly, reluctantly, Alara lifted her head. Lyra's eyes, the color of a winter sky, held a universe of contempt. Beside her stood Caden, a broad-shouldered pack warrior who had once looked at Alara with something other than disdain, before Lyra had claimed him for her own. Now, his face was a mask of indifference. It hurt more than the kicking of the bucket. "That's better," Lyra purred. "Now get to it, before you become entirely useless." She swept away, her laughter echoing in the vast empty hall. Caden gave Alara one last unreadable glance before following his future mate. Alara's jaw tightened. She would not cry. Tears were a weakness she could not afford. She would do what she always did. She would endure. She would grit her teeth and push the pain down, deep into the hollow place inside her where hope had long ago died. She would finish this floor, and then she would go out into the biting wind and haul more wood, just to prove that she was not broken. Not yet. The wind was worse than Lyra had promised. It was not just a wind, it was a physical assault. It howled like a starving wolf, tearing at her clothes and trying to rip the breath from her lungs. Snow, sharp as needles, drove into her face, blinding her. She had already refilled the main bins, her body trembling with exhaustion. But Lyra, in a final act of spite, had insisted the woodshed at the far edge of the territory also be stocked. A place no one used in winter. A place that required a treacherous walk through the darkening woods. Now, the world had disappeared into a vortex of swirling white. The path was gone. The trees were skeletal phantoms against a churning gray sky. Panic, cold and sharp, began to pierce through the numb shell of her endurance. She was lost. Every direction looked the same. Every gust of wind seemed to spin her around, disorienting her. The cold was no longer just a companion. It was a predator, sinking its teeth deep into her. Her feet were numb stumps. Her fingers, curled inside her thin mittens, had lost all feeling. She stumbled, her foot catching on a hidden root. She fell hard, the impact jarring through her entire body. For a moment, she just lay there, the snow a deceptively soft blanket. It would be so easy to close her eyes, so easy to just stop. No. The word was a spark in the frozen emptiness of her mind. She would not die out here. She would not give Lyra the satisfaction. With a groan that was torn from her lips by the wind, she pushed herself up. Pain shot through her ankle, sprained, badly. She tried to take a step, and a cry of agony escaped her. It was useless. She could not put any weight on it. She was trapped. Despair, thick and suffocating, washed over her. This was it. This was how her worthless life would end, alone in the snow, forgotten. Then she heard it. A sound that did not belong to the storm. A low, pained growl, followed by the splintering crack of wood. It was close. Fear battled with a desperate, nonsensical flicker of curiosity. Hobbling, dragging her injured foot, she pushed through a thicket of snow-laden pines. And then she saw him. It was a wolf. But it was like no wolf she had ever seen. He was immense, a creature of myth, his fur the color of midnight and shadow. He was easily the size of a pony, his shoulders corded with muscle that strained even in repose. But he was not in repose. A massive pine tree, likely a casualty of the raging wind, had fallen, pinning his hind leg to the frozen ground. Dark blood, almost black against the pure white snow, stained the ground around the wound. His eyes, when they snapped to her, were not the eyes of a simple animal. They were intelligent, ancient, and filled with a blazing, furious light. Molten gold. Alara froze, her own petty misery forgotten. This was a true wolf, a shifter, but one of a scale and power far beyond any she had ever encountered in the Silverwood Pack. He was a lord, a king among his kind. And he was dying, he snarled, a deep rumble that vibrated in her chest, a clear warning. Stay back. Ordinarily, she would have. She would have scrambled away as fast as her good leg could carry her. But something held her rooted to the spot. It was the pain in his golden eyes. It was a mirror of the pain she carried inside herself every single day. The pain of being trapped, helpless, alone. She took a hesitant step forward, raising her empty, trembling hands. I won't hurt you. The wolf's snarl intensified, but it was weaker now. A tremor ran through his massive frame. He was losing too much blood. The cold was finishing the job the tree had started. She could run. She could try to find her way back, leave him to his fate. It was the sensible thing to do. But as she looked at him, at this magnificent creature brought low, she saw herself. and she could not leave him. Ignoring the screaming protest of her ankle and the terror thrumming in her veins, she limped closer. "The tree," she whispered, more to herself than to him. I have to try." The trunk was immense, far too heavy for one half-frozen, starving girl to move. But the way it had fallen, it was braced against a large boulder. It was a macabre lever. If she could just shift the balance. She put her shoulder to the rough bark, her boots scrabbling for purchase on the icy ground. She pushed. Nothing. It was like trying to move a mountain. The wolf watched her, his golden eyes narrowed, a strange mix of suspicion and something else, something she could not name. "I need to get under it," she grunted, her breath pluming in the frigid air. She dropped to her knees, ignoring the fresh wave of pain from her ankle, and began clawing at the snow beneath the trunk, trying to dig out a space to get better leverage. Her raw fingers burned as they met the ice, but she ignored it. Paragraph S. Finally, she had cleared enough space. She lay on her side, wedging her shoulder and back under the immense weight. She could feel the pressure on her bones, a terrifying, crushing force. "Okay," she gasped, her voice thin. "Okay. Now." She gathered every ounce of strength she possessed, every bit of desperate, stubborn resilience she had honed over a lifetime of abuse. She thought of Lyra's sneer, of Caden's averted eyes, of the endless cold. And she pushed. A scream tore from her throat, a sound of pure, agonized effort. The tree groaned. It shifted, scraping against the boulder. An inch. Another. The wolf let out a sharp cry, pulling his mangled leg free. And then the tree settled back into place with a heavy, final thud. But he was free. He staggered to his feet, his injured leg held off the ground. He turned his head, his golden gaze fixed on her. She was still half-pinned, the weight of the tree now resting fully on her shoulder. A sharp, searing pain exploded in her collarbone. Something had broken. She lay there, panting, black spots dancing in her vision. She had done it. She had saved him. And in doing so, she had doomed herself. A hysterical little laugh bubbled up in her throat. "Of course." The great wolf limped toward her. This was it. He would finish her now. A quick, merciful death. It was more than she had expected from life. She closed her eyes. She felt a warm breath ghost across her cheek, smelling of pine and winter storms and blood. She felt a gentle nudge against her face. Not teeth, not claws. A soft, inquisitive pressure. Hesitantly, she opened her eyes. His enormous head was right there, his golden eyes inches from hers. The fury was gone, replaced by an intensity that stole the air from her lungs. He seemed to be looking not just at her, but into her. Slowly, instinctively, she lifted her good hand. Her fingers were numb, clumsy, but she had to. She had to touch him. She reached out, her trembling fingertips brushing against the thick fur of his cheek. The world exploded. It was not a sound, it was a feeling. A bolt of pure, white-hot energy shot up her arm straight into her heart. It was agony and ecstasy, 1,000 lightning strikes in a single second. A scream was ripped from her soul. The space between them ignited with a blinding flash of silver-gold light. The world dissolved into a maelstrom of power and sensation. She felt a searing heat on the back of her hand, a pain so sharp and precise it was like being branded with a star. Through the blinding light, she saw the wolf changing. His form twisted and reformed, bones lengthening, fur receding. The light coalesced, and where the great wolf had stood, a man now knelt. He was as immense and powerful as his other form, broad-shouldered with a face that was all harsh, beautiful lines, framed by a mane of wild black hair dusted with snow. He was naked to the waist, despite the impossible cold, his skin covered in ancient, swirling tattoos that seemed to move in the dim light. But it was his eyes that held her. They were the same eyes, molten gold, glowing with a terrifying, possessive fire. He was staring at her, at the place where her hand had touched him, and then at her face. Awe and disbelief and a profound, soul-deep recognition warred in his expression. He reached out, his large, calloused hand hovering over her. He was impossibly, terrifyingly beautiful. A predator. A king. Then he spoke, his voice a deep thunder that resonated not in her ears, but in her very bones. You're her. He gently touched her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. The simple contact sent another jolt through her, this one not of pain, but of warmth. A deep, primal hum started in her chest, a feeling of connection. It was terrifying. It was wonderful. What was happening? He leaned closer, his golden eyes searching hers, devouring her. He looked down at the back of her hand, which was lying on the snow. On her skin, just below her wrist, a mark was glowing with a soft, silvery light. It was a complex, beautiful pattern, like a stylized wolf's head intertwined with a blooming flower. It was a brand, a claim. His gaze lifted back to her face. A slow, dangerous smile touched his lips. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator that had just found the one thing in the world it had been hunting for. Mine, he growled, the word a vow, an unbreakable promise. The pain in her shoulder, the crushing cold, the terror and the confusion, it all became too much. Her body knew what her mind could not comprehend. This man, this impossible creature, had just laid claim to her very soul. Her last conscious thought was of his golden eyes, burning like twin suns in the heart of the storm. Then, the world went black. Warmth. That was the first thing she registered. A deep, penetrating warmth that seemed to soak into her bones, chasing away a chill she felt she had carried her entire life. She was lying on something impossibly soft, nestled under a weight of heavy, rich furs. A fire crackled nearby, its scent of pine and cedar filling the air. Her body ached, but it was a dull, distant pain, not the sharp agony she remembered. She slowly opened her eyes. She was in a room carved from wood and stone. A massive hearth dominated one wall, the fire within casting dancing shadows. Rich tapestries depicting epic hunts and starry skies hung on the walls. It was a room of wealth and power, the likes of which she had only ever dreamed of. Panic fluttered in her chest. Where was she? Who had brought her here? You are safe. The voice, that deep, resonant thunder. She turned her head, wincing at the pull in her shoulder. He was sitting in a large carved chair near the fire, watching her. He was dressed now, in simple black trousers and a dark tunic that did little to hide the powerful muscles of his chest and arms. His black hair was still damp, and his golden eyes seemed to burn even brighter in the firelight. Alara tried to sit up, but a sharp pain in her shoulder made her gasp. Easy, he said, his voice softening. Your collarbone was broken. I have set it, but it will need time to heal. He gestured to her shoulder, which was neatly bandaged. Her old, ragged tunic was gone, replaced by a soft, oversized chemise of fine linen. She clutched the furs to her chin, her heart hammering against her ribs. Who are you? Where am I? He rose from his chair and moved to the side of the bed. He was even taller than she had realized, a towering presence that radiated an aura of absolute authority. He did not sit on the bed, but knelt beside it, bringing his intense gaze level with hers. The gesture was one of respect, yet it felt more powerful than if he had stood over her. I am Kale, he said, his voice a low rumble, and this is my home. You are in the heart of the Stone Fang Mountains. Kale. The name echoed in her memory. Stories whispered by traveling merchants. Kale, the Alpha King, the supreme leader of all the northern packs, a shifter of ancient bloodline and immense power who ruled from a fortress carved into a mountain, a being of myth and legend, a monster to some, a god to others. And she had touched him. Her gaze flew to her hand. The silvery mark was still there, no longer glowing, but etched into her skin as if it had always been a part of her, a brand, a claim. His eyes followed her gaze. The soul bond, he said, his voice soft but absolute. It is forged. It has not happened in 1,000 years. Soul bond? She whispered, her throat dry. I don't understand. You are my mate, he stated, as if it were the simplest, most undeniable fact in the universe. The other half of my soul, the one I have waited centuries for. Her mind reeled. Mate? Her? The worthless Omega, the pack ghost! It was impossible. A cruel joke. This powerful, magnificent king could not be bound to someone like her. It was a mistake. No, she breathed, shaking her head. No, you're wrong. I am nothing. I am no one. An outcast. You are not nothing, he growled, a flicker of anger in his golden eyes. It was not directed at her, but at the words she spoke. You are the one who walked into a blizzard to save a stranger. You are the one whose touch ignited the stars. You are everything. He reached out and gently took her hand, his fingers tracing the mark on her wrist. A jolt of warmth shot up her arm, quieting the panic, soothing the fear. Her body responded to him, to the bond, even as her mind screamed in protest. It felt like coming home to a place she had never known. I have nothing to offer you, she whispered, the words a confession of her deepest insecurity. I have no name, no power, no worth. Kale's grip on her hand tightened, possessive and sure. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to the soul mark, his gaze never leaving hers. The touch was electric, profound. You are wrong, he said, his voice deep and certain. You have everything I need. He stayed with her for hours, though she lost all track of time. He brought her broth, feeding it to her himself when her hands trembled too much. He told her of the bond, of a connection so deep it tied their very life forces together. He explained that the pain she felt from his wound would fade as he healed, and that he, in turn, felt the echo of her own lifetime of aches and sorrows. She listened, caught between terror and a fragile, burgeoning hope. Could this be real? Could she truly be wanted? Valued? Later, as exhaustion began to claim her, he stood to leave. Rest, he commanded softly. No one will harm you here. You are under my protection. He paused at the door, looking back at her. The raw possession in his eyes was still there, but it was tempered with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "I will have my beta's mate, a healer named Anya, come and look at your ankle. She will bring you some proper clothes." Then he was gone, leaving her alone in the warm, quiet room with the crackling fire and the scent of him still lingering in the air. She looked at the mark on her wrist, a permanent, beautiful scar that tied her to a king. For the first time in her life, Alara felt a flicker of something more than just survival. It felt terrifyingly like hope. Anya was kind. Her face was lined with laugh lines, and her hands, though calloused from work, were gentle as she examined Alara's ankle and redressed her shoulder. She was the maid of Kale's second-in-command, a massive, cheerful man named Fen, and she treated Alara not as an outcast, but with a quiet, respectful deference that was utterly bewildering. "The Alpha King has not left the Citadel in a decade," Anya said as she wrapped a fresh bandage around Alara's ankle. "He has been waiting. The whole pack has felt his loneliness. To see him now, it is like the sun has finally risen after a long, dark night." She looked up, her warm brown eyes meeting Alara's. "Thank you." Thank her? For what? For stumbling into him? For being the recipient of some cosmic accident? Alara did not know what to say, so she just nodded, her throat tight. The next few days passed in a dreamlike haze. Kale was a constant presence. He was either in the room with her, talking to her in his low, rumbling voice, or she could feel him nearby, a steady, reassuring warmth at the edge of her senses through the bond. The connection was a living thing, a current of emotion and sensation flowing between them. She felt his immense relief and a deep, abiding tenderness that was directed entirely at her. In turn, he seemed to feel the phantom aches of her past, the deep-seated weariness in her soul, and it made a protective anger simmer in him. One afternoon, he was called away to a council meeting. The abrupt silence in the room was jarring. The absence of his presence through the bond was like a sudden, chilling void. For the first time in days, she was truly alone, and the old, familiar feelings of worthlessness began to creep back in. Anya had left a tray of food and a simple but beautifully made dress of dark green wool. Her ankle was much better, the swelling gone. Restless, Alara dressed and decided to venture out of the room. She needed to see that this place was real. The Citadel was a marvel of stone and wood, a fortress that felt more like a living city. Corridors opened into vast halls and balconies that overlooked a breathtaking valley. People, shifters of Kale's pack, moved with purpose and confidence. Some glanced at her, their eyes flicking to the now faint mark on her wrist, and their expressions shifted to one of awe and respect. They bowed their heads as she passed. Her, a ghost. They were bowing to her. It was too much. She found a small, secluded balcony that looked out over the snow-covered peaks. The air was crisp and clean, so different from the damp chill of Silverwood. She leaned against the stone railing, pulling the sleeves of her dress over her hands. "So, the rumors are true." The voice was unfamiliar, laced with a cold arrogance. Alara turned. A man stood in the shadows of the corridor. He was handsome in a sharp, predatory way, with pale eyes and an air of nobility that felt wrong. It was a practiced grace, not an innate one like Kale's. "The great Alpha King has finally found his mate," the man continued, stepping into the light. He wore the insignia of a visiting Alpha, but his scent was off, tainted with something dark and smoky. "And it's you, a scrawny little thing from a backwater pack. How disappointing." Alara's blood ran cold. This was not one of Kale's people. This was a stranger, an intruder. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "A concerned party," he said with a dismissive wave. He took a step closer, his eyes zeroing in on her wrist. "Let me see it." Instinctively, she hid her hand behind her back. A low growl of warning rumbled in her chest, a sound she had never made before. It was a primal echo of Kale, a gift of the bond. The man's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed. "Feisty. He'll like that. But it won't save you." His gaze was chilling. "He thinks that bond makes you his, that it makes you strong. But a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And you, little Omega, are very, very weak." Before she could react, he lunged. He was impossibly fast. He grabbed her arm, his fingers like iron bands. His other hand clamped over her mouth, stifling her scream. Panic exploded in her chest. She struggled, kicking and twisting, but he was too strong. He dragged her back into the shadowed corridor. "Lord Malachor will be so pleased," he hissed in her ear. "The key to breaking the Alpha King, delivered right into our hands." Through the bond, she felt a sudden, violent surge of rage and panic from Kale. He knew. He knew she was in danger. She tried to scream his name, but the sound was muffled against the man's hand. A cloth was pressed over her face. It smelled sweet, cloying. Her lungs burned. Her struggles weakened. The world began to spin, the edges of her vision turning dark. The last thing she felt was the bond, stretched thin and screaming with Kale's frantic terror, before darkness swallowed her whole. Pain. It was a cold, gnawing agony that was nothing like the clean pain of her broken bone. This was a violation, a sickness. She awoke to darkness, the air thick with the stench of decay and burnt magic. She was lying on a cold stone floor, her limbs heavy and unresponsive. She tried to reach for the warmth of the bond, for the steady presence of Kale, but there was only a horrifying, aching void. It was like a part of her had been amputated. The connection was still there, a faint, thready thing, but it was being suppressed, choked. The pain of the separation was a physical torment, a hollow ache in the center of her soul. She pushed herself up, her body trembling. She was in a circular chamber, lit by a single guttering torch. The walls were slick with damp, and the air was freezing. Around her wrists were heavy manacles. She looked closer, and her blood ran cold. They were forged from silver. Silver. The bane of shifters. It burned not just the skin, but the spirit. It dampened their magic, severed their connections. The skin beneath the cuffs was raw and blistering, the source of the sickening pain. Panic, raw and absolute, seized her. She was trapped. She was alone. Kale couldn't find her. The bond was too weak. "She is awake." The voice echoed in the chamber, deep and resonant, but holding none of Kale's warmth. It was cold as a crypt. A figure emerged from the shadows. He was tall and robed in black, his face obscured by a deep hood. The air around him shimmered with a dark energy, a palpable aura of malice and ambition. This was not the man who had taken her, but he was clearly the master. This was Lord Malachor. "The Alpha King's precious mate," Malachor mused, his voice dripping with contempt. "I must admit, I expected more." He circled her like a vulture, his presence oppressive. "Do you know what you are, little girl? You are a key, a vulnerability. For centuries, Kale has been untouchable, a fortress of power and solitude. But now," he gestured to her, He has a weakness. You. Alara stared at him, her fear a cold knot in her stomach. What do you want? Malachor laughed, a dry, rasping sound. What all great men want. Power. The throne Kale sits upon belongs to a stronger bloodline, a darker one. Mine. The Ember Covenant has been patient, but the time to strike is now. He knelt before her, his face still hidden in shadow. She could feel the chilling intensity of his gaze. The soul bond is a powerful piece of magic. It anchors Kale not just to you, but to the very life force of this land. A beautiful, tragic flaw in his design. He reached out with a gloved hand and tilted her chin up. We are going to use that bond. We are going to corrupt it, twist it, and through it, we will drain him of his power. We will sever his connection to the land, and I will take his place. He will be a king with no kingdom, a god with no power. And you will be the instrument of his destruction. The words struck her with the force of a physical blow. To be used to destroy Kale? The one person who had ever looked at her and seen something of worth? The thought was more horrifying than any threat to her own life. No, she whispered, tears finally breaking free, tracing cold paths down her dirty cheeks. I won't let you. Malachor's laugh was cruel. You have no choice. The ritual is already prepared. By dawn, the Alpha King will be broken, and it will all be because of you. He stood and retreated back into the shadows, leaving her chained and alone in the suffocating darkness. Despair, absolute and crushing, fell over her like a shroud. He was right. She was weak. She was worthless. She had brought nothing but ruin to the one person who had shown her kindness. Her hope, so new and fragile, shattered into a million pieces. She huddled on the floor, the silver cuffs burning her wrists, the cold seeping into her bones. The pain of the severed bond was a constant, soul-deep throb. She was utterly alone, lost. She closed her eyes, her body racked with silent sobs. Kale. She thought his name, not as a call, but as a prayer. A final, desperate plea to the universe. She poured all her fear, all her despair, all her pathetic, useless love into that single thought. And then, something answered. It was not a voice, it was a feeling. A flicker of warmth against the crushing cold, a pinprick of golden light in the absolute darkness of her mind. Hold on. The thought was not her own. It was faint, distant, strained through the suffocating static of the silver and the dark magic. But it was his. It was Kale. I am coming. The connection was tenuous, a spider's thread across a vast chasm, but it was there. He was fighting for her. He was looking for her. He had not abandoned her. A fresh wave of tears came, but these were not tears of despair. They were tears of a desperate, ferocious hope. He was coming. She just had to hold on. She did not know how much time passed. An hour? A lifetime? The faint connection to Kale was her only anchor in the terrifying darkness. She clung to it, focusing all her will on that single thread of warmth. Then, the heavy stone door to her cell grated open. Two of Malachor's guards, their faces grim, grabbed her by the arms and hauled her to her feet. The silver cuffs seared her skin, and she cried out in pain. They dragged her from the cell and down a long, winding corridor. The air grew colder, and the scent of burnt magic intensified. They emerged into a vast, cavernous chamber. The chamber was dominated by a ritual circle etched onto the floor in what looked like dried blood. At its center was a jagged obsidian altar. Malachor stood beside it, his arms raised, chanting in a dark, guttural language. The air crackled with malevolent energy. The Ember Covenant, his robed followers, stood around the perimeter, their voices a low, droning chorus. They forced her onto the altar, chaining her silver-bound wrists to the cold stone. She was the sacrifice, the focal point of their terrible ritual. "The moon is at its apex!" Malachor's voice boomed, cutting through the chanting. "The bond is vulnerable! Begin!" He placed his hand on her forehead. A wave of icy, corrupting energy flooded her. It shot straight to the core of her being, seeking the bond, seeking Kale. She screamed, a raw sound of pure agony. The faint thread connecting her to Kale flared with pain. She could feel his anguish, his fury, his desperation. The dark magic was using her as a conduit, poisoning the bond, draining him. The mark on her wrist, once a beautiful silver, began to turn black, the lines twisting into something ugly and corrupt. "Yes," Malachor hissed, his voice triumphant. "Feel him weaken. Feel his power fade. He is being unmade, and you are the key." She could feel it. The warmth of Kale's presence was dimming, being consumed by the encroaching cold. He was losing. Because of her. Rage, hot and pure, suddenly erupted inside her. A rage born of desperation and a fierce protective love she hadn't known she possessed. No, she would not be his weapon. She would not be the end of Kale. She closed her eyes, shutting out the sight of Malachor, the chanting cultists, the sickening ritual. She turned inward, searching for that tiny, flickering thread of her bond with Kale. She found it, battered and fading, and she poured every last ounce of her will, her love, her very life force into it. "Kale!" she screamed into his mind. "Here! I am here!" And at that exact moment, the entire fortress shook. A deafening roar, the sound of a mountain breaking apart, echoed from the west wall of the cavern. With an explosive crash, the stone wall imploded inward, showering the chamber with rock and dust. Through the dust and chaos, a figure emerged. It was Kale. Not in his human form, but as the great wolf, a creature of pure, unrestrained fury. His fur bristled, his lips were peeled back in a terrifying snarl, and his eyes were not gold, but burning silver, the color of his rage. Behind him poured his warriors, their own transformations halfway between man and beast, a tide of claws and fangs and righteous fury. The battle began instantly. It was not a fight, it was a slaughter. Kale's warriors fell upon the unprepared Ember Covenant with savage efficiency. The cavern filled with the sounds of battle, the clash of steel, the snarls of wolves, and the screams of the dying. Kale himself ignored everyone else. His silver eyes were locked on the altar, on her, on Malachor. With a roar that shook the very foundations of the chamber, he launched himself across the room. Malachor, his face finally visible in the torchlight and contorted with fury at the interruption, threw up a hand. A wall of black shadow fire erupted in front of Kale. The great wolf did not even slow down. He smashed through the wall of dark magic as if it were smoke, the shadows sizzling and evaporating against his incandescent rage. Malachor stumbled back, his eyes wide with disbelief and fear. "Impossible! The ritual was working! You should be weak!" Kale was upon him, but just as his jaws were about to close around the usurper's throat, Malachor did something desperate. He flung a shard of pure shadow energy, not at Kale, but at the altar, at Alara. Kale, in a move of pure instinct, twisted his body, intercepting the blow meant for her. The dark magic struck him in the shoulder. He let out a terrible, pained cry and staggered, his massive form faltering. The silver light in his eyes flickered, and a wave of pure agony, sharp and debilitating, shot through the bond and into Alara. Seeing him fall, seeing him hurt for her, something inside Alara did not just break, it detonated. The rage, the fear, the desperate, all-consuming love for this man who had crossed the world for her, it all coalesced into a single point of unbearable pressure inside her chest. The silver cuffs on her wrists began to hiss, the metal turning white hot. "I will not let you hurt him!" The voice that ripped from her throat was not her own. It was powerful, resonant, ancient. It was the voice of a queen. A wave of pure, white gold light exploded from her body. It was not a fire, it was a cleansing, a purification. The light slammed into the chanting cultists, and they did not burn, they simply dissolved, their dark magic unmade. It washed over Kale, and the shadow wound on his shoulder evaporated, his strength returning in a sudden, powerful surge. The obsidian altar beneath her cracked and crumbled to dust. The silver manacles on her wrists melted away like ice in the sun, freeing her. The light was a part of her. It was her power, the hidden, dormant magic of a life-bringer, a soul healer, awakened by an act of selfless love. Malachor stared, his face a mask of horror. What are you?" Alara stood, her simple dress now seeming to glow, her body wreathed in a soft, radiant aura. The black, corrupted mark on her wrist was gone, replaced by the brilliant, silvery soul mark, now blazing with power. She felt Kale's awe, his love, his absolute adoration, flooding through the now clear bond. She looked at the Shadow King, the man who had called her worthless, who had tried to use her as a tool. And she felt no fear, only a cold, triumphant rage. "You called me nothing," she said, her new voice ringing with power. "A ghost, a weakness." She took a step toward him, the very stone at her feet seeming to hum with her energy. "I am not nothing. I am the other half of his soul." She raised her hand. Light, pure and brilliant, gathered in her palm. "I am his," she declared, her voice echoing in the sudden silence of the cavern. "And he is mine." Malachor screamed as he raised a shield of shadow, but it was useless. Her light struck him, and it did not destroy him. It unraveled him. It peeled away the layers of dark magic, the stolen power, the ambitious cruelty, leaving behind the small, terrified man he truly was. He collapsed to the ground, broken and powerless. The battle was over. The last of the Ember Covenant were dead or had fled. Silence descended upon the cavern, broken only by the panting of the warriors and the crackle of the last few torches. Alara's power receded, the brilliant light softening back into her skin. The strength left her legs, and she swayed, exhausted. Before she could fall, strong arms were around her. Kale had shifted back, his human form radiating warmth and life. He pulled her against his bare chest, holding her with a desperation that stole her breath. He buried his face in her hair, his whole body trembling. "Alara." He breathed her name like a prayer. He pulled back, his hands framing her face, his golden eyes blazing with tears and an overwhelming love. "You saved me. You saved us all." "You came for me," she whispered, her own tears finally falling. She touched his face, assuring herself he was real. He was here. Always, he vowed, his voice thick with emotion. To the end of the world, I would have come for you. He leaned down and kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a kiss of desperation and relief, of claiming and being claimed, of a bond reforged in fire and light. It was the kiss of a king who had found his queen. In that kiss, all her old wounds, all her insecurities, all the years of being told she was worthless, were washed away. He saw her. He had always seen her. She pulled back slightly, her hand still on his cheek. She looked down at the soul mark on her wrist, glowing with a soft, steady light. Then, filled with a new, unshakable certainty, she moved her other hand, pressing her palm flat against the center of his chest, right over his heart. She focused on the bond, on the overwhelming love she felt for him. It was no longer a thing that had happened to her. It was a thing she was choosing, an active claim. Mine, she whispered, echoing the first word he had ever spoken to her. A gasp escaped Kayal's lips. A brilliant light, matching the one on her wrist, flared under her palm. When she pulled her hand away, a new mark was etched over his heart. The same stylized wolf's head intertwined with a blooming flower, a perfect match. Their souls, now visibly and irrevocably bound, one to the other. He looked down at the mark on his chest, then back at her, his expression one of profound, humbled awe. Alara, he murmured, pulling her back into a gentle, reverent embrace. The return to the Stonefang Citadel was a triumph. The warriors who had fought with Kayal looked at Alara with a fierce, protective loyalty. They had witnessed her power. They had seen their king, who had been lost in lonely grief for centuries, reborn through his love for her. They had seen their future queen save them all. Kayal did not let her go for the entire journey back. He held her in front of him on his massive steed, her back pressed against his chest, his arms a warm, protective cage around her. She could feel the steady beat of his heart against her spine, a rhythm that matched her own. When they arrived, the entire pack was gathered in the great courtyard. Fen, his beta, stood at the front, his cheerful face grim with the relief of seeing his alpha return. Beside him, Anya wept openly with joy. Kayal dismounted, then gently lifted Alara down. He kept one arm securely around her waist, holding her to his side as he faced his people. The courtyard was silent, all eyes on them, on her. The old Alara would have shrunk from their stares. The old Alara would have hidden behind him, convinced she was unworthy of their attention. But she was not the old Alara. She stood tall, her hand resting on his chest, feeling the warmth of their shared mark. Kayal's voice boomed across the courtyard, filled with pride and ringing authority. People of Stonefang! For centuries, our heart has been hollow. Our throne has been solitary. No more. He turned his gaze down to her, his golden eyes softening with a love so potent it was a physical force. This is Alara. She is the other half of my soul, the one who brought light back to our world. She who was lost is now found. She is my mate. He paused, his gaze sweeping back over the crowd, his voice rising to a powerful declaration that echoed off the mountains. She is your queen! For a heartbeat, there was silence. And then, the courtyard erupted. A roar of cheers, howls, and stamping feet shook the very stones. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated joy and acceptance. Fen let out a howl that was picked up by every warrior, a pledge of fealty not just to their king, but to their new queen. They were not cheering for a bloodline or a title. They were cheering for her, for the girl who had faced down a Shadow King, who had wielded the light, and who had brought their Alpha King back from the brink of despair. Kale leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. "Welcome home," he whispered, his voice for her alone. Tears welled in her eyes, but for the first time in her life, they were tears of pure happiness. She looked out at the sea of faces, at the home she never knew she had, and then back at the magnificent man who was her other half. The king who had seen a queen in a worthless ghost. She had told him she had nothing to offer. He had said she had everything he needed. And here, wrapped in his arms, anchored by a love as vast as the mountains, she finally understood. She was not worthless. She was not invisible. She was home. She was loved. She was everything.